Movement Redefined, the large version, it really is my life's work. 8 years of work. It's got so much material in it. It's time to do a smaller version. I always like to go deeper into the science than not deep enough. What's cool about this, and I want to just throw this out there right now, this book is free.
I like to ask, what is the goal?
Yeah.
What is the main reason why you're doing this thing, right?
I want to change as many lives as possible. I want to have the biggest impact. I had never thought I would be giving away free books. Guys, welcome to the Right Angle Podcast. We have a very fun and enjoyable episode tonight because we're going to be talking about some things very near and dear to my heart. My co-host, Jonathan Moore, I think you would agree, this is going to be a fun episode because we're going to be talking about some of the benefits of the training methods, particularly the 90-degree eccentric isometrics and what they do for the body. And so I'm excited to go over that. I think the audience is going to find that useful. Yeah, we've been talking about this is going to be an enjoyable episode.
No, for sure. For sure. This one's great.
For sure. And this is based on the book, Movement Redefined Fundamentals. It's completely free, so check the book out on my website. Just press the download button. It's yours for free, no strings attached, but you can also follow along. So we're just kind of going through the different chapters of the book, different topics. We are on chapter 5. We covered the previous 4, so you can check those out. So one of the things that I want to do tonight, Jonathan, is before we get into some of the benefits of the 90-degree principle is I want to just lay this out for the audience so that they can understand there's 3 categories of all these benefits and how they fall into this kind of research that we've done and investigation that we've done in terms of the book, so that they understand where we got these benefits from. We didn't just pull them out of thin air. The first one would be just empirical research studies. Pretty simple, right? That's more what we would consider scientific evidence. You know, you see a study that shows, hey, at 90 degrees, you have the most cross bridges, you have the most motor unit recruitment. We can actually look and see from various studies that does happen, whether it's from EMG studies or whatnot. The next one, the category 2, would be the mechanistic conjecture, and a lot of people might not understand what that is, but all it means is that we're looking at a certain mechanism in something like biomechanics, or looking at a mechanism of neuromuscular physiology or structural muscle physiology, and then we're making various kind of conjecture statements about that and applying it to how we train.
It's basically putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which we have to do a lot because there's not one particular study that we can look at and say, hey, this study has all the answers for us. But we know it's not possible, right? But we know, looking at things like length tension relationship, which we've discussed, we can kind of go deeper into that and say, based on this mechanism, we know that during various types of movements, and you can take any movement, you could say, hey, roughly at the moderately stretched position, we're going to have the most muscle activation and the highest number of cross bridges. That is mechanistic conjecture. We're making an assumption based on how a mechanism works. And then the third category would just be anecdotal and experiential evidence / data. Experience as a trainer. That's it.
Exactly.
It's what we see daily with our clients, right?
And not just daily, but like even for me, but obviously with you, yearly.
Yeah.
Years. It's not like, one or 2 good months. I mean, it's for you. Long time. For me, several years,
Well, there is a very slight drawback of experiential and anecdotal data. And people will say, oh, you're just using a lot of different N equals 1, meaning like, oh, you did a study of 1, but you did it repeatedly. Like, when we train someone, it's not like we're doing a study on 18 different people. We're doing a case study on one person. Well, that is true, and those don't have a lot of value and legitimacy in the scientific world. But I've done it and you've done it. If we add it all up, we've done this N equals 1 experiment thousands of times, and at some point, that does have a lot of value. This is basically what doctors have done for years when they've, they're
N equals 1, N equals 1,000. It works.
It works. It works. So let's jump into some of the benefits. Now, if we look at chapter 5, we see some of the topics that I go into in terms of like what I noticed during my doctoral study at UGA when I was doing my PhD. And just real quick here, when we looked at kind of the comparison of the eccentric isometrics versus traditional reps, some of the things that we found were, first off, it had greater post-activation potentiation for the eccentric isometric reps, which all that means is what? You know what that is, the post-activation.
Yeah, for sure.
More power, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. That power output, for sure.
So when we did the eccentric isometrics, compared to the traditional reps, they had more power output on their things like their vertical jump test. And then
sheer power. Right
yeah,
there,
exactly. And then when we looked at to me, this was one of the most interesting ones, was their symmetrical loading. Okay, we found in this study that the group that did eccentric isometrics compared to traditional training, their symmetrical loading improved. Symmetrical loading is simple. It means simply that how much or what percentage of your body are you loading.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what percentage are you loading to each side of the body? Are you loading 60% over here, 40% over here, or vice versa? When the people did, or the participants, when they did traditional training, their symmetrical loading was off.
We see that all the time. I mean, I see that all the time. You know what I mean? Like, who was it? I think we both were watching over somebody. Their right foot was caving out.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they were doing that on their squats, their left shoulder was leaning forward.
Yep,
like
exactly.
The symmetry was thrown off.
Symmetry was thrown off.
You see
Exactly.
it right there. So.
Well, that's the thing with traditional reps, is that when you do traditional repetitions, it's simply reinforcing your current and pre-existing levels of dysfunction and compensation patterns. So if somebody is asymmetrical,
and if you fix one, it then leads kind of another problem.
It leads to another problem.
It keeps
Exactly.
going. It's like, where do you end?
Exactly. So in this study, we found that if someone was asymmetrical to the point where they were 60-40, the traditional reps only reinforced that. In fact, it made it worse. When they did the eccentric isometrics, they simply slowed it down, relied on that sensory feedback from muscle spindles. What happened? Their symmetry improved. They went closer to like 55-45. It didn't fix it completely, but it improved it
again,
substantially.
like we've mentioned many times, really important what you said, your sense of feel.
Exactly.
Proprioception, neuromuscular advancement. That's what's going to make the change in terms of locking your cues in and then really getting that muscle-to-mind connection, doing the exercise correctly.
Exactly. And that's one of the main premises behind this training method, is that we're trying to improve sense of feel so that we can clean up the movement patterns. We can improve our muscle function.
Just a reminder for people, it's like if someone cuts my arm, I want to be able to feel that.
You want to feel it.
I need to be able to feel that. So
Exactly.
it's like that's a basic example, but a high level example as well. But it's the same thing with
That's what we
training.
want.
You want to be able to have the high sense of feel.
High sense of feel. Speaking of which, one of the first things that we go into in chapter 5 is the enhanced muscle function through increased proprioception, right? Well, proprioception is our sense of feel, right, from muscle spindles. And if we have enhanced feel, well, we are going to inevitably have enhanced muscle function, right? It's going to, and it's what we found in the study at UGA. There were some other things that we found, like improved stability. They cleaned up their movement patterns. Their level of sway when they were on the force platform, it was reduced. They were more stable. Their center of mass, it stayed more still, essentially, which is what we want, right? We don't want our center of mass to be moving around. And the better your posture, which we didn't look at in this study, but the better your posture, you can imagine, man, your sway is going to be even less because your center of mass is staying so
Oh yeah, and then that plays
rigid.
back into symmetry too, and
Yes.
how that affects things. Yeah.
Absolutely. We went over the post-activation potentiation. There's some kind of intricate scientific elements with this. I don't want to get too bogged down in the deep science of why activating muscle spindles more, why that increases power and post-activation potentiation, but it does, and it works through some similar mechanisms. But the key is, when you activate muscle spindles, it works very similarly to the stretch reflex. And so the eccentric isometric protocol we do, it is essentially doing
Allows that
that.
to fire and let the interfusal muscles to really send the signal out.
Exactly. I want to get into the optimization of this closed loop model. And we were talking about this earlier because this is something that oftentimes, like, I wasn't exposed to this in my master's program. I was exposed to it more in my PhD, and I think it's similar for you. You're doing your master's right now in kinesiology.
Yeah.
You were,
we might have, I don't remember, but the closed loop
model, and versus open loop model, it's not used a whole lot until you get a little bit deeper into the research. But all that means is we want to be able to rely on a closed loop model, because a closed loop model means that you have you can rely on sense of feel to modify and fine tune your movement, because the movement is happening more slowly.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Emphasizing the eccentric.
Exactly. Sure. When it's an open model, okay, it's the movement is happening very rapidly, and you can't adjust it or fine tune it during. You can only fine tune it on subsequent reps. So when you lift weights, which most people, they're just so fast and rapid and they're out of control. First off, they have no sense of feel because they're too loose. But secondly, even if they did have sense of feel, their ability to fine tune it during the movement, it can't happen because their movement's too fast.
Yeah, and then you're gonna miss out on gains too.
Yes,
You know
exactly.
what I mean? Like you really are and let that muscle overload.
Exactly.
And then also just like kind of the joints. Getting
Yep.
the joints fired up, charged up. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
the joint health is
Exactly.
just not optimized.
Exactly.
When you're always rushing through everything.
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's another,
For
other
sure. I mean,
benefits for
the
that
joint
as well.
health, I mean, you could say that is the number one benefit of the
Sure.
90-degree
Oh, yeah.
eccentric
Super
isometric
important.
principle. But yeah, so this 90-degree training, it takes advantage of the closed loop model of movement, which is basically sensory integrated movement. That's what we want. We want to be able to sense things and then integrate it into our movement and fine tune it. Optimization of muscle stiffness and muscle spindle sensitivity. We know from looking at the research that you want a high level of muscle stiffness. You don't want to be loose. In fact, that's how you activate muscle spindles.
The muscles don't know how much I'm lifting. They don't know what's on the bar, what's this, what it looks like. This, they feel the tension. They sense the tension.
That's it.
So that's just the stiffness level. It's like it has to be there
Yep.
in order for these muscle spindles to fire right.
Yep.
In order to produce the most force.
Yep,
And
exactly.
move optimally, lift
Exactly.
optimally.
When you go too deep, you have to sacrifice stiffness. And if you sacrifice stiffness, you are sacrificing your ability to call on those muscle spindles, which means you have a reduced sense of feel. And why would anyone want to perform high intensity exercises with heavy loads and high forces and have a reduced sense of feel? That is setting you up for injury. That's a recipe for disaster right there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the way most people train, that's what's happening. The way we train, it's the opposite.
And before you get to the point of where you legitimately lose, your ability to have that, you're kind of numb. You're not able to tap into that sensory feedback. You feel stuff. You feel some pump. You feel some things. You have some sort of, you can feel what's going on. You have some sort of sensory understanding, right?
Right.
But still, that's not optimal. So it kind of
Right.
goes back to like it's good, not great.
Right.
But then over time, it eventually can lead to the part where it's like you don't even feel anything.
Yeah.
So then people kind of play around with, oh well, this feels fine. It's because you're not being able to tap in. You've overrode that so many times, and then they go into these deep things, other things like that, and before something happens.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you can get to the point where you can override safety mechanisms in your body, and you can override warning signs your muscles and your body and even your pain receptors are meant to give you, but we don't want that to happen. You want to be in tune with all those sensations. Let's move on. Optimization of co-contraction. This relates to the muscle stiffness.
Exactly.
Co-contraction on a bench press, for example, we don't want just to be using the pectorals, especially on the eccentric. We want to be using the back or the lats on that eccentric to stretch the pectorals. And when we go to 90 degrees, we are optimizing that because the research shows that 90 degrees is where you have optimal or highest levels of co-contraction.
And then this is another small, like for example, the bench press, and then also just talking about the bench. When you do the bench, keep your glutes engaged as well.
Yeah.
Then that ties into your
ties
lats.
in. It ties in.
And then by default, back to the chest.
Yep.
So just keeping everything tight, not just the back and the arms and things like that, the whole body. Don't have those energy leaks.
That's a great point. Well, co-contraction does directly tie back into full body stiffness and elimination of energy leaks. And like you said, the glute activation helps you fire the lats more. And by firing the lats more, you stretch the pectorals more. So now you not only have more muscle activation for growth, but those muscle spindles are fired more. So now your sense of feel is even better simply from co-contracting and squeezing your lats and glutes.
And then
like
you
you
can
said.
maximize your gains.
Exactly. More muscle growth, more strength.
I mean, I have a couple of young guys, that don't know, how can I get my chest bigger? And I'm like, well, your back needs to get stronger. Just simply put,
that's
I don't
exactly
have your back muscle. And I'm like, okay, well, we fix it there, and then we can get there. So,
well, powerlifters say it all the time. The key to a bigger bench press is a stronger back.
Of course, sure.
Well, if that's the case, that's not just for that exercise. That's for every lift. The key to a bigger lift is you have to fire the antagonist muscles well. Well, that happens at 90 degrees. So why would we want to go past that if that's the key for pretty much every lift? Optimization of the natural length-tension relationship. We've talked about this a lot. That length-tension relationship, there's a desired length of those sarcomeres or muscle fibers that we want them to function at. If they're too short or if they're too long, we don't produce as much force. and you can have crowding or overstretching of the sarcomeres, and you sacrifice force production, you sacrifice activation. Well, we want to stay in this optimal range, and that optimal range tends to be around 0 to 90 on most movements.
Right, and like you were just saying, like when you overstretch, those sarcomeres get damaged. They're not optimal, and then it goes into the Golgi tendon, and then things like that, and then back to the sensory feedback. But
interesting what you just said there about the sarcomeres and fibers getting damaged when you go past that, because I think this is a little later on in the chapter, but that does happen too. It's not just the temporary, I don't have as much force, or I don't have as many muscle fibers firing.
And it's subtle. It's not like one rep, you know what I mean? They're done for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just slowly over time, because the body's resilient, the body's strong. It's how God made it. So it just takes time for it to kind of boom, boom, boom. But it's going on that continuum.
Exactly. It's going on the continuum of too much muscle damage.
Yeah.
What you just said, it's like you overstretch the fibers because you're outside of that natural length-tension relationship, and now you are damaging the fibers. And there is research showing that too much muscle damage from the eccentric can actually cause atrophy. And it's funny because over the years you always heard like, you got to tear the muscles down to build them back up. Well, too much of that can literally cause the muscles to shrink.
It's the leveler.
Yeah.
That tool we use, it's like you don't want to be too far this way, too far that way, right in the sweet
right in
spot.
that range. And that's what we do with the 90-degree. That's a perfect analogy, because that leveler, that little sweet spot it shows, that's where we want to train in. That's where we want to train. And then when we do occasionally need deeper positions for unique circumstances in life or sport, it's available to us because our body is healthy, our muscles are healthy.
Do good to be able to combat the bad.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Don't do bad and then combat the bad.
No, I got nothing else to say about that, because that's exactly it. Optimization of tighten and elastic energy. Okay, so some people watching this may have heard about actin and myosin. You've heard about this a lot just in school. These are the two proteins we talk about in terms of like how muscles fire. Even the length tension relationship, it's like the myosin and actin fiber. They attach to each other, right?
You ever done this?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a third protein in there that has not been discussed as much over the
Tennessee
years.
Titans.
Yeah, the Tennessee Titans, right? Titan is the other protein. It's actually the largest one, but that one is potent, and it's responsible for storing and delivering elastic energy, and that is also involved in the length tension relationship. And so if we're functioning at this excessively long lengths or excessively shortened positions, we can't take advantage of tighten, and so we don't have as much springiness or coiled effect to our muscles, right?
When you think about it, like if you go too deep on a squat, then jump, your springiness evaporates.
It's gone. It's reduced. Exactly.
Similar to how actin plays out as a structural protein.
Exactly. So, and the other thing that's interesting about tighten is that it helps to prevent excessive stretching of the sarcomere. So it's like, wow, we have all these mechanisms in place in our body that God created us to be this way, right? It's like, hey, we have mechanisms built in to prevent certain things from happening. Even the research shows tighten is there to prevent overstretching. It's like, okay, well, why? Why would we want to prevent that? Because not only do we have more spring-like mechanisms that we can take advantage of, but it's also safer. So again, we are maximizing the effects of tighten by training in this 90-degree position. Optimization of lever arms and biomechanics. We've talked about this a lot.
Torque, power, strength,
power,
health.
That's it. Absolutely. It's just, it's a basic lever principle. It's physics. It's like, okay, you can produce the most leverage at roughly 90 degrees. And so this is not just, it's beyond the point now of like, we have more muscle fiber activation at this point. It's like, no, we actually can produce more torque because we have better leverage, and we're in a more biomechanically sound position.
Like hockey players when they get the flex on the stick.
Yeah.
You don't need too much flex on the stick. What happens to the stick? Snap.
Yeah.
Same.
Exactly. And then similar with elastic energy with tighten, like you don't want something to be so stiff where it doesn't deform at all. You want some deformation.
Exactly.
But
it's the fine line.
Yeah,
man.
Exactly. Yeah. But 90 degrees does appear in the literature to prevent that fine balance, or that perfect balance of like, hey, this gives us elasticity without overstretching, and it also gives us stiffness without being so stiff that we have no deformation that could actually like break because it's so stiff.
Yeah, exactly.
We talk about the optimization of the stretch reflex, the real one. So I say that the real one because a lot of people think that when they bounce out of the bottom of a squat, that's how they activate the stretch reflex. That could not be further from the truth, right? Because all they're doing is literally ricocheting off their tendons and ligaments and connective tissue. They're not using the stretch reflex.
That's not really a spring.
No.
That's like a bounce.
Yeah,
off
it's a
like
bounce.
the joints, the tendons, and boom, coming up. You know, it's not your muscles inside, internally, springing itself.
Exactly. Well, think about it. When you see someone bounce out of the bottom of a squat, what happens? They bounce and then they get stuck, like right around, like they're like, you know, they'll bounce and then boom, it comes up slow. It's like there's this initial jolt of momentum because, like, yeah, your tendons and ligaments can give you a little bit of that, but it's not powerful after that. It's very slow and it's very grinding. And they're probably damaging their tissues, not to mention really fatiguing their nervous system. And setting themselves up to ingrain faulty jumping programs into
Especially
their nervous
the
system.
absorption.
Yeah.
Not just the explosion, the absorption. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Feet going out, knees bending in, low back. Oh, why do my knees hurt? Why do I play basketball when my knees hurt? It's like, well, your shins you can't fire as well. Yada, yada.
And we just had a trainer come in today, Ahmed, right? And he was talking about he was talking about jumping because I was explaining the 90-degree thing to him. It was his first time coming in. He had some questions about the 90-degree principle, and we were giving him some kind of information just briefly. But he was like, "Yeah, it makes sense because like no one would jump from like these deep ass to grass squat positions." I'm like, exactly. It's innate, built into our nervous system that our body gravitates to roughly 90-degree positions or mid-range, moderately stretched positions. You won't see anyone jump from an ass to grass position. Okay, this is a good one. The optimization, in terms of what 90-degree eccentric isometrics do, they optimize mobility and stability. Now, a lot of people would think, okay, the stability thing kind of makes sense because, you know, you're so locked in and you have that high level of muscle stiffness, your posture's good, there's no energy leaks. But a lot of people wonder, like, wait a minute, what do you mean optimize mobility? There's no way. Like, you're only training 90 degrees. How can you optimize mobility? But we know
maximal and optimal mobility, two different things.
Two different things.
Got to understand what's going on.
Two different things.
So,
exactly. Yeah. We don't want to be like this wet noodle that can just deform.
You don't. Like you said, you know what I mean? You don't want to be so stiff where you can't move, but then at the same time, you're like a wet noodle. You don't want to be like that either. Where's your torque? Where's your strength? Where's your power? Where's your joint health? It's not there.
I see some of these feats of mobility that individuals on Instagram perform. They're usually 18 to 28-year-olds. You're not going to see people in the 30s doing it because the body will break down at that point. But
I wish them all the best.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do it. God bless you. Yeah, that's tough.
You saw the one I sent you the other day with the box and pushing on the ankle. Crazy.
We're like, what's the goal?
Yeah. There is no goal other than just simply showing what you can do.
I'm just wondering, like, what's the goal?
Yeah.
You know,
I think
it's brutal.
It's a feat of mobility. It's an impressive feat. But I see some of those things.
I ain't doing it.
Not only am I not doing it, I would not want to be able to do some of those things because I know what I would have to sacrifice to get there would not be good. And if my body could do those positions, like it's probably not functioning well because the stiffness properties, the muscle spindle activation, my alignment is going to be off.
Yeah, it's going to be off. What was that one real quick? The box was like up here.
It was like at her face.
Yeah, and then
she puts her foot on the box.
The glute stretch.
Yeah, and then she puts her hands on the foot and pushes herself up. Man. Insane. Like but if she was like, she looked like she was 19, 20 years old. Yeah. Give it 10 years. Or like you said, do 50 of those in a row and see how you feel the next
50
day.
More. Yeah, I hope not. I really hope she doesn't. For her
don't
sake.
do it.
Don't. But for me, that's a hard pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Hard pass.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, we were just discussing this earlier, the optimization of the power output equation. And what's that? Force times distance?
Divided by time.
Okay.
Time being the most important variable.
It is the most important variable, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. If you simply write it out on a piece of paper, you see that you have the numerator, you have the denominator, and the denominator, you only have one variable in there. Mm-hmm. That's time. Mm-hmm. And that makes it the most important or powerful element of that equation. It can dictate the power output and can dictate the outcome.
If time's slow, your power's slow.
If time is slow, power is slow. Now, if you change force, it has a pretty big impact on the equation. If you change distance, it has an impact on the equation. But again, if you change time, it has the biggest impact. And if you change distance, okay, so this would be more range of motion. The problem with that is you've actually impacted all the other elements of this, because if you change it, let's say you increase distance, you unfortunately decrease force,
lose the time,
and you increase
the
time, right? But you have an impact on both those. Whereas if you change time, you you basically decrease time. You didn't have to decrease your force. You actually have more force. Now, your distance is decreased a little bit, okay? But it's a worthy sacrifice because this is an equation. You have to give and take on this, okay? So ideally, if you could increase the force and the distance and still decrease time all at once, like that would be the ultimate. But you can't. It's the human body. It's physics. It's not possible. It's not possible.
So it's more than a worthy sacrifice.
It's more than worthy. It's the only sacrifice. So what I'm getting at here is that 90 degrees, it takes advantage of this because it literally maximizes force and it minimizes time. And that's how you optimize power.
For sure.
That's the power equation.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the transfer and impact to all other movements. This is big because we know that movement transfers, right? How you move in the weight room, what's it going to do? It's going to transfer to all other areas of life.
I mean, we think of all the football players we train, me, myself, playing football. You're running, you're cutting, you're jumping, you're tackling, you're hitting, you're backpedaling, things like that, going for the ball.
Exactly.
And it plays into everything that you do.
What's the most common thing that we see with people who squat deep? What happens to their running form?
Oh, it bows out. It's excessive. It goes outwards. You know what I mean? And then what I've seen so many times, hamstring pulls.
Yes.
Non-contact injuries of hamstring pulls. And then, how it plays into the running gait and things like that. And then how poor lunges play into running gait, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the hamstrings, the way those fibers run, they run in parallel to each other. And they fire well when you have good alignment. And you can use the hamstrings. You can actually go through the muscle of the belly of the hamstrings. When your feet and hips are rotated out, you're going around the hamstrings. You can't use them well, and it's going against the nature of how those fibers run. And so that's like you said, you get all these tears and pulls with non-contact. We see them so much in the NFL. You look at all these guys that are getting these hamstring pulls, non-contact injuries, you watch them squat 99% of the time. They're squatting deep with their toes out, and that is just setting them up for those injuries. Yeah, we touch on this a little bit. I was debating about going through this one, but the teaching of active movement versus passive movement. A lot of strength training that we see in the industry, it resembles passive stretching to an extent, right? You see people, the way they bench press, the way they squat, the way they do a pull-up and just hang at the bottom. It's like this passive movement. Yes, it's somewhat active still. Obviously, they're not completely passive and just dead. The nervous system's still firing. But it resembles passive stretching, and that's never good for performance. It's not even good for connective tissue or health because you're simply hanging out on the fibers and you're hanging out on the connective tissue. We want active movements where the muscles are fully engaged, right?
Yeah. Well, I think of like you got a plate of food, right? If you're doing those passive stretches within your lifts, and how you're doing, you're only eating half of the plate. Yeah. 2/3 of the plate, maybe. You know what I mean? It's just like when you have to keep that tension the whole time, you're eating everything on the plate. There's nothing that's missing. There's no negative to put in it. It's like there's no benefits that you're missing out of.
That's a good way.
Whereas if you do, you can still get benefits from doing that. But there's much more ground you could have covered. Yeah, that makes sense.
I like that. No, it's
much more piece of the pie you could have had. You could have had the whole thing.
The whole thing.
You're missing out on some of it when you do that. That's exactly. And you do that over and over.
Exactly it.
You're missing out.
Exactly. And this is why people, when they see the way that we do the exercises, when we post them, they're like, "Why is everybody so tight? And why does everybody have these same expressions? Why is everyone trying so hard?" It's like because this is how you do optimal movement under loaded conditions. You are keeping it as active as possible and as engaged as possible rather than as passive as possible, which they're not used to seeing because they're used to seeing kind of this hybrid of active, passive, where, like you said, they're only getting half the benefits.
Right.
Joint centration, the next topic.
I remember when you taught me this years ago, how that kind of acts as like a bridge. You got a bridge here. If there's a part off of the bridge is going to collapse.
That's it.
It's the same thing. But when the bridge is in place, when it is centered, when the joint starts centered, how powerful is it? How many cars go over a bridge? How much weight is it able to, take on? You know what I mean? It's the same thing when it comes to our lifts.
Exactly. Movements. No, that's it. I mean, it's the bridge analogy. It's like these engineers go to school and they spend decades figuring out how do you equally disperse force across a bridge so that there's no structural breaches. Well, we want the same thing with our joints and how they're stacked. And if you have good alignment, like your knee and your hip and your ankle and your feet are straight, well, you would say that is a stacked or centrated joint. You have equal tension dispersed across the various involved joints and even the various muscles involved, right? Because there's 4 types of centration that I go into. I don't go too in depth on the smaller book here, but the bigger one I do. But
Yeah.
you want the tension to be equally dispersed across each joint and muscle, but you also want it dispersed across the various joints and muscles so that not one particular joint or one particular muscle is taking the entire brunt of the load and
That's
force.
right. They're equally firing.
Yes.
You know what I mean? With whatever joint and every muscle is being used. And then the same with the upper body too, just as, the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, stack those, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, I know those are, basic examples, upper body, lower body,
Yep.
just joint stacking and how beneficial that is to everything.
Exactly. Can't remember who was having to do an unstable push-up the other day. Remember like the push X handles, that kind of the cups handles?
Yes.
And they were going just a little bit too deep, and they couldn't figure out why at the bottom it kept shaking. Well, it's because when you go past 90 degrees, you lose the stacking effect of the joints, and they're no longer centrated. So now force is dispersed unequally. It's not a straight line anymore. And then you start to get all these things shaking, but it's not only unstable, it's unsafe. Because those force vectors are not going straight through.
That's
so
right.
this
The body's been put in interesting positions that they don't like. And then, like, I was coaching somebody about a week ago. Their knee was hurting on a squat. Well, okay, tighten your wrists. By tightening their wrists, less pressure comes off their knee.
Right?
They're not here with their shoulders and their posture and then pushing their hips forward on the way down with the load. Boom, just tightening the wrist, knee pain gone on a squat. So it's just amazing how the joint centration really plays in everything.
That's a great thing to highlight. Like something as small as tightening your grip on a squat.
Yep. Knee
People
pain.
are like, wait, squat? Did you mean bench press? Like, no, squat. It actually helps the knee pain because what's it do? It gets everything tight up here. It stacks, the column, and then it gets your lats activated. Lats tie into the glutes.
Yeah,
glutes tie into the hips.
And then, look at it. How hard is it to restack your wrists and make that cue, make that adjustment? It's so easy. It's a simple cue. It's not a massive formula we're talking about here. Boom, tighten your wrist. Boom.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly. Want to move on to the topic of recovery and training frequency. Well, before we even do that, just to highlight, though, the 90-degree principle takes advantage of the joint centration model, that joint stacking model. That's where we were going with that. And when you train too deep, you don't take advantage of it. You actually compromise that centration model. Let's move on to recovery and training frequency. So this is something that I know you've experienced. It's something I've highlighted a lot in my own training for my own body as well as my athletes and clients, is that the better our form is, the more frequently we can train, and the better our body recovers. The worse... I know, right? It's like, that's a foreign concept. No, but, if your form is off and it's lousy, you're going to need a lot of recovery time, not just for your muscles,
but
for your
those
joints.
muscles tearing up, it's going to tear too much.
Yep.
And then the recovery of wanting to go work out again it's going to take longer time. Yep. It's going to be dispersed more.
How, I'm kind of curious to know this. I've been meaning to ask you this for a few weeks. How many workouts do you do per week? Weights, like 5?
Oh, not as many as I used to.
Yeah, but 4 or 5, right?
Yeah. Okay. If I when I was like really rocking around, about 4 or 5.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. And maybe throw in like a few light activation ones in there. But in terms of actual workouts, 4 or 5.
Yeah, body weight stuff, hit the bag, things like that. On top of all that,
I do usually 6. Sometimes I'll do 7 full body workouts.
Times a week.
Yeah. So it's 6 or 7 usually full body workouts per week. And people hear that, they're like, how do you do 6 or 7, or even for you, 4 or 5 full body workouts per week without feeling like you're just damaged and like, so not unrecovered and, overtrained and overreaching? It's because if you train therapeutically and you train optimally, it's actually very healthy in the body. And I don't want to say there's no limit, but your ability to be able to handle training volume goes through the roof because it's a therapeutic stimulus. It's like, how much of a therapeutic stimulus can you take?
Is doing well.
Yes.
So your body's feeling good. And then as a result, you're feeling strong, stable, and then it's therapeutic while you're doing it.
Exactly.
So you're able to go 4 or 5 times a week, and then like 6 or 7, and then 10 as well.
Well, when I was training, I used to do traditional bodybuilding splits of doing 1 muscle or 2 muscles per day, and I would come back to it like 5 to 7 days later. And I would do squats and, come back to it a week later. I remember I would still not be recovered in my joints, and even my muscles, my force production capabilities would be reduced because I was not recovered from the previous workout. And it wasn't a nutrition thing. It was a muscle function thing where I was going so deep with my range of motion.
It was just getting so beat up.
It was getting so beat up, I couldn't recover from it.
I don't know who it was. I saw on Instagram somebody talking, and it just pops up, right? It's not like, and this guy was talking about how he does leg day once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Well, I got to that point on the Mike Menser Remember, we've been talking about Mike Menser. We had Rami on here. We're going to have Rami back. But remember, we talked about the Mike Menser thing. He was wearing that Mike Menser shirt. Mike Menser was the king of the heavy duty, high intensity, low frequency, low volume training. And I started to look at his training protocols when I was like 18 because I was getting so beat up and then not making any progress. And he was essentially saying, hey, hit your muscles once every like 12 to 18 days. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. But looking at it now, it's like, okay, with traditional training methods, it kind of makes sense. It makes sense. It's like, man, if you're going to train with these lousy methods where you're destroying your joints and overtearing your muscles, yeah, I can understand 2 or 3 weeks to fully recover. So anyways, with 90-degree training, we can train crazy frequently because it's therapeutic. It's not contra-therapeutic.
Yeah.
We already talked about mobility. We talked a little bit about mobility, but we can talk about it a little bit more. Just how I know when I was beat up training full range of motion, how my mobility was suffering. Even though I was training with larger ranges of motion than I train now, my body felt so stiff and achy.
One thing with I had the same when I was doing a lot of stretching, things like that, trying to increase my mobility. One thing for me that I always felt was inflamed. Always felt inflamed when I had these things going on. And I think that's a big contributor in terms of our tissue health. And it's just getting pulled too much, and it's contributing to those inflammation levels.
Well, I would argue that inflammation is the number one reducer of mobility. If things are inflamed, you are going to have compromised mobility. And if you want to, I guess you could say that probably the most common thing that causes that inflammation in the muscles is excessive range of motion and faulty mechanics.
It goes here and there.
Yep. Okay, next one. These are obvious, but we probably should have started with this. Maximizing hypertrophy, strength, and power. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Right. Yeah.
And that's what the 90-degree method does because we have maximal motor unit recruitment. We have max number of cross-bridge attachments. We've taken advantage of the length-tension relationship. We have the most leverage so we can lift the heaviest weights.
Joint centration as best as possible, things like that. The muscles getting overloaded the way we need to. We're not leaving anything on the table. No energy leaks.
No, exactly.
Results in all those things.
Exactly. So it's like this. We're not just talking about health. We're not just talking about longevity. Performance and muscularity, muscle growth. I want to move on to the mTOR pathway of muscle growth. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. We talked about this earlier because I know this is something that I wanted to mention to you because you probably hadn't come across this in school. I hadn't. I didn't come across this in any of my classes, even my PhD. But I came about it roundabout through one of my classes with one of my professors. He was talking.
At a roundabout.
Yeah, he had a roundabout in a roundabout fashion. He was talking about how we activate the mTOR pathway, and this goes back to mechanistic conjecture we were talking about earlier. So he was talking about putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So he was talking about like how this mTOR pathway works. The mTOR pathway is directly responsible for protein synthesis, and protein synthesis, it's how you grow muscle. You cannot grow muscle really any other significant way other than protein synthesis or increasing protein synthesis. And the pathway that is involved for that has to get triggered is the mTOR pathway. Now, certain things in our nutrition can trigger that, like higher protein, especially things that have more branch chains in them. This is why people take branch chain amino acids. Or leucine, that's one of the 3 branch chain amino acids that's the most potent. Why eating eggs is so potent for muscle growth because it has the highest levels and highest amount of leucine in it. So take the nutrition aside, and that's another discussion for another day, which we're going to have to get into more nutrition. But if we talk about training, what are things that we can do to optimize the mTOR pathway? Or on the flip side of that, what are things that we can do that can actually like inhibit the mTOR pathway or shut it down? Fatigue or metabolic stress is one of the main things that can determine how much of that mTOR pathway we trigger. Fatigue and metabolic stress, it shuts down the mTOR pathway. Okay, so we don't want too much fatigue. We don't want too much metabolic stress if we're trying to trigger muscle growth, right? But the other thing that actually triggers the mTOR pathway is high levels of tension.
Can only do that if you're doing the eccentric properly.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do it if the eccentric is rushed, it's out of whack, it's out of alignment, going boom, boom, boom. It's just not going to be able to maximize on it.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that the eccentric does not cause as much fatigue.
Exactly.
Concentric actions trigger more fatigue. And if fatigue shuts down the mTOR pathway or decreases the mTOR pathway or inhibits it, so to speak, we want to minimize those concentric fatiguing elements of the rep. When we spend more time in the eccentric component, what are we doing? We're having more total tension.
Tying my point in.
Yeah,
exactly.
More total tension, which triggers the mTOR pathway, and we're reducing fatigue and reducing like those hydrogen ion buildup and lactic acid buildup. So now we're also minimizing the inhibitory effects on the mTOR pathway at the same time. So when we do eccentric isometrics, when we hold the 90-degree position, it's actually not very fatiguing, right? If you do a 90-degree hold, like on a squat with heavy weight, and you're locked in, how fatiguing is that? It's actually surprisingly not that fatiguing. You would think it would burn like crazy, right? It doesn't if you're really locked in.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, for sure.
So we can get more into that. I know it's kind of a complex topic, but I want people to understand that when they do all these endless reps and just eccentric, concentric, and they're just repeating that excitation, contraction, coupling process, tons of fatigue. When you go down slow and hold the 90 position with the muscles stretched at 90, it does all the right things and eliminates the bad things, like you said. Mental concentration and cognition. You talk about this for a second. Like, what do you notice with the 90-degree training that we do?
You have to use your mind.
Gotcha.
You have to use your mind. You know what I mean? And that's where your neuromuscular strength and development is going to occur.
Yep.
When you're having to use your mind and then focus, and and then you got the muscle spindle activation, and all the muscles in the are firing optimally, and then it's giving the signal to the brain, and then coming back down, and then we can put that post-activation potentiation, for example, and things like that. So it just goes down the whole list, right?
Yep,
but I mean,
sure.
At the end of the day, how I like to bottle up, you're using your mind more.
Yeah.
The mental concentration is increasing. You know what I mean? And so from there, only the benefits happen. There's nothing negative about it. Nothing bad can happen with that when you're advancing in that. And like younger kids and things like that, when they're not going as heavy, what's the goal many a times with these younger kids? Neuromuscular advancement. And it's like that doesn't just stop as a kid. It's like it's the same as adults. Even if we're lifting 4 or 5 plates, whatnot. It's like you're going to continue to get better at that, and it's going to help with every other area.
Well, I mean, actually, the research shows that you can keep building new neural pathways and new neurological connections, which we want to do. We don't want to.
So I'm saying it doesn't just hit a limit. Oh, you know what I mean? That's just for young kids learning how to move, and then once we get older, we're going to go heavier, and then boom, boom, boom.
Right.
No, that doesn't stop, and then that in turn is going to help with your form, your strength, everything else.
Exactly. Even on the mental side, though, how mentally freeing is it when you can do an exercise without pain?
Oh, great.
It's amazing, right?
I thought you were about to say, is it like you have to have a lot of mental focus? You got to have a ton of mental focus.
Yeah, I mean, that is like everyone who goes through our training methods, they say like, wow, they cannot believe how mentally engaged they have to be. But besides that, how the mentally liberating experience.
For sure, you don't have to worry about that. That goes out the window. So now you can just focus on the movement and lifting the weight and doing what you got to do. It's great.
You don't have to worry about pain. You don't have to worry about
liberating.
It's mentally liberating.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're not worried like, oh man, I could blow something at any second. Oh, my back's about to hurt. Oh, I felt that. Now I can't lift as heavy.
It's like I got up and I made it through. Yeah. I made it through.
But when you feel pain, your nervous system literally starts to shut the movement down. It sends inhibitory signals. When you don't feel pain, you feel strong, you feel locked in, and your mind is at work. It's like, whoa, now you're getting all these signals like, man, I can lift heavy. It literally motivates you during the rep itself. I'm talking like intra-set. It motivates you, which is crazy. The 90-degree principle, we've talked about how muscle is an endocrine organ, an endocrine tissue. And as a result, when we have a healthy muscle function and those endocrine organs, the muscles are healthy, we have decreased inflammation, right? Which is great because inflammation is responsible for pretty much every disease. But also what's interesting is inflammation and insulin resistance appear to be kind of indirectly or directly, I should say, tied into each other. There's like this inverse relationship. Whereas if inflammation is high, our insulin sensitivity is going to be reduced. And insulin sensitivity, we want that to be high because that means our muscles are like a sponge. They can absorb nutrients.
Right? But then the things that they're absorbing in is you're not just absorbing whatever's out there. You're absorbing what you need to do.
Yep.
Acts like someone has like a filter system.
Yep.
Like with the breathing and the nasal breathing, When you breathe through the nose, you're breathing in the proper air, the right air, the optimal air. It's the same thing with the insulin.
Yeah, for sure. No,
The
for sure.
absorption that it has.
Exactly. Well, you have what's called upregulation of GLUT4 receptors. That means your muscles have more little sponges on them when you have less inflammation. And so, actually, there's a topic down here I'll get into, but I have noticed with myself and with clients that when they start training with the 90-degree principle, that they can handle carbohydrates better, and they can also handle higher calories a little bit better. Now, that doesn't give you license to just overeat and eat whatever you want, but people do notice, and I noticed it for myself because I used to be very carb intolerant. Like I had a tough time absorbing carbs. I didn't handle them well. I would get kind of fat or soft off of them. I just didn't absorb them well. And that was from the inflammation that was being caused from traditional training and excessive range of motion, and my joints were killing me and my body was inflamed. I reduced the inflammation by training properly. Now my insulin sensitivity went up. Now I could actually handle carbs, and I could even handle a little more calories, but you got to be smart with this because it doesn't give you license, like I said, to just eat whatever you want. But if you do have a cheat meal occasionally, you actually handle it better because you absorb it better. Want to address the correct versus corrective exercise. We talk about this a lot. We don't really do corrective exercises. We exercise correctly, and that is the best corrective exercise you can do, and that's the 90-degree principle.
Oh, this lunge hurts my body, so I'm never going to do a lunge again. No, we need to be able to put the body in the right spot to then be able to do it. There's times where we might need to go off of it for a bit.
Yeah.
But if you just like sit there and it's like, oh, we'll never do that again, throw that off, then there's something wrong with your mechanics. There's something wrong with your muscle function.
Exactly.
So just a reminder of that.
And to tie into the next topic of whether or not we use like soft tissue modalities like foam rolling, we never touch it. We don't have to touch it because our body is always healthy. It's functioning properly. And if it's not, we know it had something to do with the movement. It was an underlying facet of how our muscles were functioning, or a muscle function or dysfunction for that matter. And if we fix that, our tissues feel great, and now we don't have to soft tissue.
Change.
Exactly.
Exactly. Change.
Exactly. I wanted a few more things here, and we're going to wrap this up. But I think another thing that you mentioned this earlier about being like sensitive to pain. Like you want to be able to tune into when your body's telling you. Like you use the example of cutting your arm, right? You wouldn't want your body to not sense that. Okay, that's a form of pain and other receptors. But you want to have increased neurosensitivity of pain. We don't want to have decreased neurosensitivity of pain. And a lot of people, when they train, they have decreased neurosensitivity of pain. That doesn't mean they have that your pain threshold has changed. You still want a high pain tolerance. Like you want to be able to handle like discomfort if necessary, but you want to be able to tune into it even at the slightest ounce of pain. Okay. Now I'm talking bad pain here. Not like something's actually like, okay, that's painful. Yes, we don't want to be desensitized to it. We want to have a high sensitivity to it, so that when our body is doing something incorrectly, it gets the warning signs immediately. And then what do? Use the mind again. This is why the 90-degree principle. It's like, man, you got to really be mentally engaged because your body's going to be giving you signals consistently and constantly, and you got to attend to them.
Right. But if you're not in those proper joint angles, you're not able to get those signals.
Yep, exactly.
As best as possible.
That's true.
So that's another thing that's important.
Exactly.
Desensitize. I don't know why I forgot to say that word earlier in the podcast. I was like, the signals desensitize. I've said it in every other one.
Desensitization.
I blanked out on that.
Let's talk quickly about the correcting of concentric movement. A lot of people get overly fixated on feeling like, oh, I got to correct my bench press form, so I need to drive my elbows this way when I push it up, and I need to do this when I drive the bar up. It's like, no, fix the eccentric, and the concentric takes care of itself. We talked about the increased force production capabilities. We've talked about improved health because our bodies aren't as inflamed.
And then the improved force absorption is great as well. Especially with the power, the jumping, landing, and things like that. It's like that's very applicable to sports and how that helps with the body protect itself there.
Absolutely. Well, we talk about force production a lot, but like you said, force absorption might be more important.
So important.
And you don't want to be absorbing force in biomechanically unsound positions, but when you train deep, it's teaching your body to use those unsound positions. Often it's like it's your new motor program. It's like, okay, well, good luck trying to absorb force in the field when someone's hitting you or you're moving quickly. It's like your body has been ingrained to use faulty positions. So your ability to absorb force and impact, it's compromised. Last few things. Teaching the lifter to become their own coach. You touch on this for a second. What have you felt like the 90-degree method has done? Because oftentimes we do train together still, and I'll still coach you through a few things, but oftentimes you're just working on your own.
Yeah, I mean, we've already hit it. It's being able to fine tune and have sensory feedback for myself.
Yes,
I'm able to sense myself. I'm not desensitized.
Yep.
I'm able to feel like, okay, this feels a little off. This feels a little here. Am I doing it right? I'm doing it right. I don't have to go look into a mirror. I don't have to go film every single thing I'm doing. I have to do, hey, does this look good? It's like no, I can kind of fine tune there based on what signals the body gives to me after I do the movements and go from there. And then occasionally, time to time, you'll come in, have a few things here and there, once in a while. But ultimately, like if you're not able to do that, and obviously you got to get better and practice. Obviously just doing stuff more and more, you get better at what you do. But you got to get to the point where you should be able to do that. For sure. To optimize whatever you're doing in the weight room and strength training and feel as best as possible. So
for sure.
If you're not, then something's off. If you're not able to do it on your own, then something's off. If I go driving a car and I'm not able to drive the car on my own, well, something's off with my driving abilities. Yeah. Something's wrong. It's very similar. So
for sure, that's great.
You be able to be your own coach, own driver, things like that.
That's it. Good point. Last one, maybe two more, and then we'll wrap this up. The improved autonomic nervous system function. I want to touch on this real quick before we complete this, because this was something that I struggled with for a long time. I naturally function more at a sympathetic state. I function in a higher sympathetic state. And for people who aren't aware of this, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Sympathetic means you're more in like fight or flight, slightly more stressed state. Yeah. Parasympathetic is more your relaxed state, more chill state. Obviously, there's a balance, because when you're lifting, you don't want to just be chill, but you want to be in control of your aggression. You don't want to be so much in adrenaline overdrive that you're like you have no control over your adrenaline either. I for years, and I believe that it was the traditional strength training methods that almost ruined my autonomic nervous system, because I was getting so so sympathetic dominant that I would just be so stressed constantly and always in fight or flight, to the point where like I would feel oftentimes I could easily go into like this panic state or anxiety state. Even doing a discussion like this could cause it. Like I had trouble with, and it was weird, very disconcerting, because like, man, I don't know when my body, it could just all of a sudden I could have like a little mini panic attack for no reason. It could be in front of people, it could be on my own. It's like, what's going on here? And I haven't even talked to you about this that much. It was kind of something that I haven't addressed more. We'll have to talk about it more in the future, but this was something that mentally
it doesn't seem like there's an anchor for it, and Howard plays with that. And we also talk the endocrine, how it plays in the hormones, and things like that, emotions, mood as well.
So. We're talking like the whole, like our bodies are very sensitive.
Plays in the whole picture.
And how we train, our muscles are that endocrine organ. It's the biggest endocrine organ of the body.
So important.
So if our muscles are not healthy, it's jacking up everything. But if they are healthy, it's repairing things. And so what literally repaired my autonomic nervous system and got me out of a sympathetic overdrive and into more of a parasympathetic state, it was the training methods. It literally helped me learn how to stay calm under stress.
And then it helps with sleep, too.
Helps with sleep and immune system. Sleep and immune system, big time. I used to get sick all the time. I used to get sick at least a few times a year. I like literally, I don't want to, say I never get sick, but like 1 or 2 day sniffles, maybe once or twice a year, and that's about it. I haven't taken an antibiotic.
Tops, man. Yeah, tops. I've never really seen you sick before.
I don't get, but I used to have to take antibiotics like 3-4 times a year for upper respiratory infections.
For me, like the sleep, I have my previous struggles with sleep and things like that. The years and times where my sleep was bad, I was training more traditional.
And for sure.
The more I really think about it, so I think that plays a factor in it as well.
So great stuff. I think what's important to wrap this up with is that people understand that our bodies are sensitive, and a lot of physiological things and elements that we experience, especially for people who lift weights and strength training, even if they don't, if they just have poor muscle function, which unfortunately everyone does unless they've gone to attempts to fix it, right? Everyone's muscle dysfunction is negatively impacting their overall health, physiological function, and performance, whether that's an athlete on the playing field or just how you function day to day. When you train with faulty methods like excessive range of motion, you are altering your natural muscle function, you're compromising it, and as a result, your overall health and physiological function is going to take a hit. Everything takes a hit.
And you said like the body's sensitive, which is 100% true. it also is resilient too. So
It is.
if you override the resiliency,
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to tap into
Yeah,
the sensitivity.
yeah.
Something bad's going to happen.
It's resilient where it can survive, but it won't thrive.
Right, but when you push that, then it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
the sensitivity's blocked out, as we discussed,
Exactly.
and then you're not thriving at all. Something's going to happen.
So we want to thrive. We don't want to just survive. And
Sure.
the 90-degree principle helps you thrive.
That's right. So that
Traditional
Right in that
training,
spot.
you can survive, but you're definitely not thriving. So anyways, guys, that kind of wraps up the key topics for Chapter 5. There's some things that we didn't go over. You can check it out on my website. It's completely free.
And it's not that long.
It's not that long.
It's a great
It's
read. It's short to the point. Totally worth it.
Exactly. It's Movement Redefined Fundamentals on my website, completely free, no strings attached. Just press the download button. And I think that's it. I'll see you guys next time.